very excited about this turnout. We've done events here before, and this is by far our largest turnout in Wenatchee, so thank you for all coming out. I know a lot of you are new to the organization. We're going to tell you a little bit more about who we are and how we can work together here in Eastern Washington through this new office. But first, I want to bring up your Congressman Doc Hastings. He's been gracious enough to be with us for all three of these events in Eastern Washington. I don't think he needs a big introduction. You know him well. First elected in 1994. Before coming to Congress, he a small business owner, and actually he was a donor to the previous organization, the Washington Institute for Policy Studies, which is now our organization, the Washington Policy Center. So Doc was a member of ours when he was a small business owner in Tri-Cities. He was a state legislator before that, and as he'll tell you, he saw the need for an organization like ours in the legislature, and that's how we first started. Former legislators, a former governor said, you know, we're in the legislature and we don't have the research and information we need to make decisions on important policy issues. We need a think tank like they have back in Washington, D.C., and that's how we first began. So it's my pleasure, about 20 years later now, to have Doc with us as we open our Eastern Washington office.
And thank you very much, and it certainly is a pleasure to be here. This really is a very, very good turnout. As you know, the Washington Policy Center is, for lack of a better word, but Dan alluded to it, a think tank. But it's a think tank that is focused on market ideas and market issues and market solutions to problems that we may have. And I think that serves potentially a very valuable service to our country, particularly to our state, but certainly to our country. Because we live in a wonderful place. We've experienced this self-government for over 200 years, and I can tell you, in the time that I've had the privilege to represent this district in Congress, I can say without qualification, and I truly do believe that this really is a government of the people. But it's only a government of the people, obviously, if the people are involved and informed and participate in their government. And certainly that happens. Sometimes it happens to a higher degree, sometimes to a lower degree, but in a free society, those are choices that individuals make. Dan mentioned that when I was in the legislature, there were no really think tanks around. And we had to get information that tried to guide us on policy issues at that time from various areas. Sometimes it was nothing more than common sense, which I think is obviously very good anyway. But the service that the Washington Policy Center and other think tanks provide now, I think, will really be invaluable. We are at what I think a very critical time in the history of our country. To put it into election politics, we know that elections have consequences. And I think there is a huge challenge facing our country right now. But one of the beauties or the geniuses of our founding fathers is that there are checks and balances, and those checks and balances will be represented at the elections. But elections are always ultimately about ideas, because that's what the American people will base generally what their votes are on, those that stand for election, what they stand for, what their ideas to whatever the solutions are. We need organizations like the Washington Policy Center to present common sense solutions that are market driven, because I firmly believe that the success of the United States of America becoming a world leader is because it is free people involving themselves in a free economy, where they can take whatever risks they want and get the rewards from those risks. That's the essence of what capitalism is about. You put that together with freedom, and that is a pretty good combination that has been proven over and over, because we're simply a small part of the world population, and clearly we're the largest market. We're a country that people look up to. So in order to have a continuation of that, and I'm reminded of what Ben Franklin said, one of our founders, when he was leaving Independence Hall, he was asked by somebody when they came out after developing the Constitution, and to paraphrase what he said, he was asked, well, what have you wrought? And to paraphrase, he said, we have a republic if we can keep it. Now, the operative word there is if we can keep it, because that is the involvement of people on a regular basis. And so if elections are ultimately about ideas, and elections will drive the populace to elect the leaders to govern our country, then we clearly have to have a consistent message of solutions to our problems from a free market perspective. And that is what the Washington Policy Center has done, and their predecessor that I worked with a little bit some 20-some years ago when the Washington Institute started. So the fact that the Washington Policy Center now is expanding beyond Central Washington over here, I think is very, very good, because all of us in Eastern Washington know that there is a bit of a difference sometimes in our outlook, solutions to ideas, and what we have on the other side of the mountains. I'm being very kind when I say that, but it is certainly true. And I think the Washington Policy Center, being over here with the presence over here, can put together their solutions and some of the areas that they have expertise in from our perspective. I think that is very, very valuable. So I'm pleased to be here to welcome them. They'll have an office in Spokane, and they'll have satellite offices in the Tri-Cities and up here in Wenatchee. So it's with that, I just want to say thank you very much for all being here, and I want to welcome you, Dan, and the rest of the Washington Policy Center for being here and being part and integrating yourself in Eastern Washington. Thank you for having me.
Well, I want to thank you again. You're obviously very busy with what's going on back in DC, and for you to take time out and be with us for 3 days, I really appreciate it. So it's great to have you with us. We're going to show a short video on the organization, which can give a great description, better than I can do, of what we do, the impact we have, and why we hope that you'll be involved with us here in Wenatchee and across Eastern Washington. So if you could turn your attention to the screen for a few minutes. This will give a good overview of the organization, and then we'll bring up some of our research center directors to talk about what's happening during the current legislative session.
I've turned to the experts at the Washington Policy Center.
And it's no wonder taxpayers have no idea where their money is being spent.
That was Paul Guthrie of the Free Enterprise Washington Policy Center. Thank you.
So we're spending lots of money and getting very little back.
Washington Policy Center, which does spectacular work.
Who are the people at Washington Policy Center?
We're a team of professionals.
We're experienced researchers.
And policy analysts. We're opinion makers.
And educators.
And we're professional communicators.
So, what is our mission?
Simply put, our mission is to improve people's lives through sound public policy based on free market solutions. As a nonprofit, nonpartisan research and education organization, we publish studies, sponsor events and conferences, and educate policymakers and citizens on the vital issues facing our region. Based in Seattle, we have a satellite office near the state capitol and have also just opened a full-time office in Eastern Washington. We are the only public policy organization with a truly statewide presence.
Our policy recommendations are based on facts and independent research, but we don't produce thick studies that just sit on dusty shelves. Instead, we focus on current issues that are important to the people and businesses of our state.
Our work with small businesses helps lead to a healthy and sustainable business climate in our state, one that encourages entrepreneurship, reduces artificial barriers to success, and leads to private sector economic growth, and helps our state's workers.
We're committed to the notion that human progress and prosperity work together in a free economy to protect the environment. We offer practical, effective solutions to today's threats to the environment.
We face some of the toughest transportation challenges across the country. Here at Washington Policy Center, we try to focus our research on reducing congestion and improving mobility, while at the same time looking for cost-effective solutions to improve traffic flows.
Washington State is ranked 37th in the nation in graduation rates, which tells us that we have a long way to go to improve public schools. We offer cutting-edge reform proposals and effective new approaches to improving student learning. And we work with policymakers to see that these solutions are made a reality.
Washington's tax and spending policies need reform as state government has grown to unsustainable levels. We offer sound fiscal analysis for policymakers and the public to help make state spending more transparent, more accountable, and effective, but most importantly, to help reduce the financial burden that government places on its citizens.
At the Washington Policy Center, we are at the forefront of advancing patient-centered healthcare reform. We work with citizens and policymakers to find the best solutions to reduce cost, to lower the number of uninsured, and to provide access to the best quality healthcare in our region.
So how do we affect change through our in-depth research and analysis?
We deliver our team's comprehensive research through different communication media.
We publish studies and commentary on issues that are critical to decision makers in our state, whether that's legislative leaders or concerned citizens across the region.
Policymakers in both parties seek us out and work closely with us to turn our ideas and solutions into reality.
We produce short video presentations that provide clear, plain English explanations on issues that are important to everyone. Issues like transportation, healthcare, and the environment.
We organize public events and conferences throughout the state of Washington, connecting experts on the issues with state leaders, the media, and citizens. Our annual dinner brings nationally renowned speakers to Washington. People like Rudy Giuliani, Jeb Bush, George Will, Czech Republic President Václav Klaus, and more. Over 1,000 policymakers, business and community leaders, and citizens regularly attend our dinner, and it's the largest event of its kind in the Northwest.
What do we accomplish with our research and communications?
We have a reputation for producing research on issues that are essential to the people of our state.
As a result, journalists and media outlets throughout Washington and across the country cite our research and interview our team of experts. From the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal to the Seattle Times and Spokane Spokesman Review, Washington Policy Center is shaping the public debate.
Our staff regularly generates more than 600 media appearances annually, from television interviews on both local and national programs to radio interviews and dozens of live events and conferences. Our work is in the media and having an impact.
Washington Policy Center operates WashingtonVotes.org, free public service website that tracks and explains all legislation in the Washington legislature. Thousands of citizens, policymakers, media, business leaders use Washington Votes as their resource to understanding the legislative process.
In 2009, after we ran full-page newspaper ads and published a letter signed by 32 state and national economists warning tax increases would hurt the economy, lawmakers balanced a $9 billion budget deficit without raising taxes. The state took an unprecedented leap forward in opening state spending for the public to see by creating fiscal.wa.gov. The law, passed unanimously by the legislature and signed by the governor, was based on our research and recommendation. Our study on eminent domain led to a law enacted in 2008 that helps protect citizens from the government taking their property. In 2007, lawmakers and voters incorporated our longtime recommendation for a rainy day budget account into the state constitution.
Our work makes a difference in producing sound policy and shaping the debate in Olympia.
Well, clearly, the only issue for the Office of State Auditor is accountability. The primary focus for the Washington Policy Center is for government to be open, transparent, accountable. I'm so thankful to really work with the Policy Center as a partner in providing that kind of accountability to the citizens of the state.
The Washington Policy Center is an important player in state policy making. They do their research, their facts are solid, and they're part of a solution on a whole host of issues that face Washington State, from education to environment to business climate. We need organizations like the Washington Policy Center that are helping leaders formulate policy that is important to citizens and small businesses.
When I've decided to take on a complex policy issue like reforming condemnation in Washington State to rein in eminent domain abuse, looking at how to streamline the regulatory framework of the state to make state government easier on the private sector, or how to make government more open and transparent, time and again, I've turned to the experts at the Washington Policy Center who bring forward powerful ideas that are well-reasoned and thoroughly researched. That's what makes them such a great partner for me and for many leaders and policymakers in our state.
The Washington Policy Center understands that when we're talking about reforming public education, the debate shouldn't be centered around whether you're liberal or conservative. It's really coming up with practical, common sense solutions to basically making our public schools better. That's one of the reasons why I've partnered with the Washington Policy Center in publishing my book, Outrageous Learning, and it's why I will continue to work with them going forward.
Washington Policy Center has grown over 23 years into something that has become not only a gift to our community but a gift to the state. They're trusted, and the people that are behind WPC are informed and they are fair.
Our goal is to make Washington one of the best places to live, to work, and to build a business.
We are wise stewards of your generosity. And in fact, Charity Navigator, the nation's leading charity evaluator, has given us their 4-star rating, their highest. WPC is a good investment, and your financial support promotes sound public policy in our state.
With your support, we can continue to advance free market solutions and be a trusted leader in the public policy debate in Washington. We ask that you join us and help us make a real difference.
Well, I hope that gives you a good overview of what we do and the impact we're having around the state. And obviously the next step would be to have a more of a statewide presence and open an Eastern Washington office. So that's why we're here today, is to celebrate that. Before I bring up our new director, I do want to have our current Eastern Washington Advisory Board members recognized. We started on this journey to be a statewide organization by forming an Eastern Washington Advisory Board. We have 2 board members from Eastern Washington right now on our board of directors, George Nethercutt and Bob Tippett down in Tri-Cities. But we have several longtime advisory board members, about 30 members on our Eastern Washington Advisory Board. So if those members that are here today, Paul Gray, Randy Gold, Diane Cornwell, Craig Larson, if you guys could stand. Bob Brody, and recognize you as our advisory board members. So they've been with us for the last few years, advising us on issues of importance to Eastern Washington. They'll be even more critical now with a director, working with him very closely. We've also held small business forums in Eastern Washington, and including in Wenatchee. We've partnered with Craig and your chamber over the last few years, holding small business forums right here. Some of you may have attended those events. So we've had a lot of activity in Eastern Washington, and we're looking to do even more. When our board completed our $4.2 million capital campaign to open up the 7 centers that you saw in the video, the next step for our strategic planning was to get more people involved, market our ideas, more people, and part of that strategic planning process was to open an Eastern Washington office. And we interviewed candidates from all over the eastern part of the state, and we were thrilled when we first met Chris Cargill in the interview. We knew we had the right person for this position. So I want to bring Chris up, who will be your contact here in Wenatchee and across the east part of the state. He can tell you a little about what he's been doing so far and what our plans are going forward here in Eastern Washington. Chris?
Well, thank you, everyone. It's great to see so many people here in Wenatchee. We're thrilled with the turnout, and this has been a wonderful experience so far. We've been in 3 different cities in 3 days, and we're looking forward to more events here in Eastern Washington. I need to thank Dan and the Eastern Washington Advisory Board members and our staff who've made this possible. We really wouldn't be here in Eastern Washington if it weren't for all of them, and I appreciate their support so much. I'd like to give you a little background about myself. I am a lifelong Eastern Washingtonian. I was born and raised in Spokane, graduated from Gonzaga University with a degree in Broadcast Communication Studies and a minor in Political Science. I worked in television news in Spokane for 10 years before joining the Policy Center last December. And I really thought this would be a great opportunity to get involved in the public policy debate here in Eastern Washington, and I'm excited to do so. We've had a lot of Eastern Washington support, as most of you have heard, from our advisory board members here and advisory board members all over Eastern Washington, and we're really looking for more Eastern Washington support as well. You know, we have a lot of work to do here on the east side of the state, and we can't do it without eyes and ears in every community. So I would encourage you to get in contact with me as much as possible, lend me your eyes and ears on community issues that are going on, and I will do my best to keep in contact with you all. We have a lot of future and past events that we've done. We've only been open about 2 months here in Eastern Washington, and we've traveled all over the east side of the state. We've been in Wenatchee 4 times already, and we're going to Tri-Cities a lot, and to Moses Lake and Spokane, and traveling all over. It really is a mobile office. We will have 2 main offices in Spokane and at the Tri-Cities Chamber building. But again, it's a mobile office. We will be in Wenatchee quite often to discuss issues and hold events, and we look forward to doing that. We have our small business forum that we're going to have coming up late summer, early fall here in Wenatchee, and we invite all of you to attend that as well. And we're also looking to hold other events and speak to groups, so if you have any suggestions for that, let me know. You know, I was talking with a person a couple of days ago about what's the key to public speaking in front of such a large group, and they said you need to own the room. And I thought, own the room? Do I really want to own the room? And you know, today I don't want to own the room, because this is just as much for you as it is for us. You know, we can't do this without your support, and so I hope that you'll consider contacting me or any of our research staff to find out more about how we can all work together. In closing, I would just like to point out a quote from Winston Churchill, who said that there comes a time in every person's life where they're figuratively tapped on the shoulder and asked to perform a duty that's unique to them and specially suited to their talents, and what a shame if that moment finds them unprepared or unwilling to do the task which would be their finest hour. And I truly believe that that moment is right now for the Washington Policy Center. And so I thank you all very much and look forward to talking to you. Thank you.
Chris's information is in your folders, how you can contact him on his travels through Eastern Washington. We want to have our research staff, which is really the core of the organization. We're a research think tank, talk about the issues that we're working on right now and what's happening during the legislative session. As most of you know, we're getting towards the end of a very key 60-day legislative session. Lots of talk of raising taxes, given the state's budget deficit. We have other ideas about how the state can balance the budget and reform education, improve health care, and so forth. So we want to share with you what's going on in Olympia and how it is going to affect you and your business. So I want to turn over to our research staff, and they're going to give just a real short, about 5 minutes each, on what they're working on, and then we'll have some concluding comments. So Paul Guppy is our Vice President for Research. He oversees our research program, and he'll be here to talk to you about small business issues and our research program in general. Paul.
As Dan said, I'm Paul Guppy. I'm the Research Director at the Washington Policy Center. And so I oversee all of the research centers, and I do the editing and organizing for our publications. I keep an eye kind of on our academic integrity and accuracy. We have a very simple motto in the research department, which is follow the facts. So our center directors certainly develop recommendations and research ideas, but if those are not supported by the actual data that they research, we don't recommend those ideas. All of our research is carefully cited and footnoted. Also, as you can imagine, you know, we're based in Seattle as a more free market, kind of more conservative organization. We operate in something of a hostile media environment. So we don't know exactly what we are saying. We're pretty sure that there's some reporter, some TV station out there that's going to challenge it. And that policy has served us very well. So consistent accuracy, and don't exaggerate, don't go beyond what the numbers say. So that's our approach to how we do our research and run our research program. The specific issue I'm going to talk about today has to do with our Center for Small Business, which is headed up by Carl Gibson. He's not here today, but we do have information about his center at the back of the room, and I just want to give an overview of his latest research. So what Carl did in the fall is he organized a statewide conference of small business people, also policymakers went to it. We held it in SeaTac here south of Seattle. And we did something kind of different in a policy conference. Instead of us putting on a program and trying to present our ideas and our information to the audience, we asked them what they thought. So we invited small business people from all over the state. We had smaller breakout sessions where we could have smaller discussions and get their ideas, and we just really asked them one basic question, which is, what is your world like? What kind of taxes and regulation in dealing with the state government? What state agencies are a problem for you? But what do you basically experience? And speaking of gathering data, as I mentioned earlier, we just listened and put together what they said. Carl wrote that up in a real simple, easy to read report that's available again in the back of the room. So I encourage you to take a look at this. It not only includes the ideas that we received from small business people, but it's organized in a format that's easy for policymakers in Olympia to use to get clear ideas about what they should do. And I'll just give a few of the main ideas that Carl researches and presents in this report. And it's no secret that our economy is in terrible shape. Our state has lost 162,000 jobs since 2008. This is objectively measured the worst economy since the 1930s. And so there are various policies to turn that around. At the national level, on Tuesday was the one-year anniversary of President Obama's stimulus package, which, by the way, was billed at $787 billion in spending, which is a gigantic figure to begin with. That's now $863 billion. So in 1 year, it tends to kind of creep up over time. But only a fraction of that has been spent. It has not held unemployment down the way that the president had predicted. When the bill passed, unemployment in the country was 7%. That policy was supposed to prevent unemployment from going over 8%, but today nationwide unemployment is 10%, and in our state it's about 9.8%. So again, as researchers, we look at that approach and we say, top-down government spending, pouring money into the economy, money which has to be borrowed from the future, that didn't work, or at least it's not working so far. The White House has been advocating all this week that it did work. But again, as a researcher, what I'm looking for is what is the measure? One measure, one unit that the White House created, which has never existed before, I've never heard of this, is they say that they created or saved 3.4 million jobs. Well, what's a saved job? I know if a job didn't exist and now it does exist, that's a created job, okay. But what's a saved job? And there just isn't any definition of what that is. So it's hard to hold that policy accountable. From our point of view, we again give the free market, we give analysis that shows that free market policies tend to work better. We dispute this idea that the government creates jobs. We don't think the government creates any jobs. Instead, what government policy can do is create the conditions so that the private sector can operate, can create prosperity and create jobs. And so our specific recommendations, and I'll just mention three right here. First of all, if you want, in the policy world, if you want more of something, tax it less. So reducing taxes on businesses is the best way to create jobs. Carl, in his report, highlights the workers' compensation tax that could be reduced. We could end the state monopoly. You know, the state runs the largest insurance company in the state, the workers' comp system. The Department of Labor and Industries has over 2,700 employees and an annual budget of $600 million. To sell a product to businesses that's illegal for anyone else to sell. Whereas in other states, they have a vibrant competitive market for workers' comp insurance. So getting rid of the state monopoly on workers' comp is the first idea that we suggest. Reducing the tax for unemployment insurance. We have the highest and almost the most generous. We're second or third in the highest level of benefits we give under unemployment insurance. It's 20% higher than the national average. So you can have a reasonable safety net for unemployed people while reducing the burden on business folks. And the last idea I'll mention is, well, actually two real quickly. Just simply raise the threshold for the B&O tax. That is the amount of money that a business can earn in a given year without paying any tax. Right now, that's about $30,000, which is nothing. We say that even the smallest businesses should be allowed to do at least $100,000 worth of business. I mean, we would raise it to $1 million if we were in charge. But reasonably, you should be able to do at least $100,000 worth of business before you pay any tax to the state. And that would allow the smallest businesses to start creating jobs. And the last idea, and Dr. Stark, our healthcare expert, will touch on this, is just to change state rules to allow affordable health care in our state. So there are many other ideas, so if you want to follow up, take a look at this study, and we're available for questions afterwards as well.
Our first center director is Jason Mercier, who runs our Government Reform Center, which looks at budget and tax issues and ways the government can be more efficient. And Jason actually is partnering with Carl Small Business Center on a study to repeal the B&O tax. So that's one of the ideas that is developed in a think tank. Governor Gregoire made a call and said, if there's an idea out there of how we can replace the B&O tax, I'd love to hear it. That's not an income tax. You know, an income tax just is not politically suitable to Washington State. So whenever people talk about repealing the B&O tax, the only other alternative is usually an income tax. Well, Carl and Jason from our two centers think they've found a way to repeal it and give something else that's not an income tax. So look for that study in the next few weeks. If you sign up to be on our mailing list, we'll make sure you get a copy of it. The governor's office has met with us several times in this issue and is very interested, and we're hoping it'll be part of the debate going forward, because we're one of only 5 states that has this sort of gross receipts tax, and we think we may have found a way to replace it that will really help small businesses. Jason?
Well, thank you, Dan. When you live on the west side of the state, we don't have partly cloudy days. We get occasional sun breaks. And it's been so long since I've seen the sun that when you have a beautiful day like today, I'm hesitant to talk about storm clouds. But there are serious tax storm clouds brewing in Olympia. Now, what started off as a slow trickle of tax proposals is now broken out into a full-out downpour. And as the result of one bill that is now making its way through the legislature, those tax proposals are going to be hitting our pockets pretty soon. Let me talk briefly about that bill. You may recall back in 2007, the voters for the 3rd time enacted the 2/3 requirement for the legislature to raise taxes. Now, we did this previously in 1993, we did it again in 1998, and on each of those times, the legislature temporarily repealed that act. So we did it once again in 2007, thinking maybe they finally will hear the message. Fortunately, lawmakers in the Senate disliked that provision so much, they voted not once, but twice last week to repeal it. Now, let me tell you how that happened. The bill that was first introduced wouldn't just get rid of the 2/3 vote requirement. It also would get rid of all the transparency provisions that were part of the initiative, and those were the 10-year impact on any tax or fee increase, email notifications of when a tax bill is introduced or voted upon, a non-binding advisory vote if the legislature denies us our constitutional right of referendum, and finally, in the voter's pamphlet, for any tax enacted, you would get a description of what the tax was as well as a breakdown of the lawmakers that voted for it. Now, the initial bill that they were voting on would have gotten rid of all of those. Originally, the Senate bill had an amendment that just would get rid of the 2/3, and when that was occurring, still not good, but we thought, you know, at least they're keeping the transparency provisions. We're a little bit excited about that, so I emailed my reporter friends and said, looks like we're going to have a pretty busy ballot in November on tax votes. Now, they went back to the legislators and said, oh, thank you for letting us have these tax votes, to which the response was, well, we didn't mean to do that. We made a mistake, so we're going to vote again to repeal that. Went over to the House passed it late last night, but they added back the requirement for the tax emails, which means the Senate's going to have to approve it again. That's basically a done deal, and then it's going to go to the governor. Now, there's one last chance for us to have those transparency provisions. The governor has line item veto authority. Even though she has indicated she wants to get rid of the 2/3, she can veto out the elimination of the transparency requirements. She hasn't indicated one way or another whether she's going to do that, but that's one last opportunity we have. So now that that tax bill is making its way through, the governor yesterday introduced $600 million worth of taxes she wants to raise. But for those in the legislature, that's not enough. Now, the governor's proposal would do tax increases on gum and candy, a $1 increase in cigarettes, a tripling of the state's oil tax, which is essentially a gas tax increase, as well as some repeal of business tax preferences. But as I mentioned, that's not enough for some lawmakers. So the other bill making its way through is a $1 billion a year sales tax increase. Now, we anticipated something like this may be coming and did economic modeling on the impacts. And unfortunately, for those of us who still have jobs or are looking for jobs, the impacts are drastic. $1 billion sales tax increase would cost almost 15,000 Washingtonians their jobs. Now, if you look at the state's full budget bone, we hear about the $2.8 billion. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Let's say they cut spending and raise taxes to close that deficit. We get a $3 billion deficit to deal with in the next budget. So with that as the full picture, when you're looking at a $4 to $5 billion deficit, if you're not going to address the problem through spending reforms, looking at a tax increase in the $2 to $3 billion range. So at $1 billion, that's 15,000 jobs out the door. Let's say you go to $2.5 billion, that's almost 38,000 Washingtonians you're going to put out of work. This is not the direction we need to head to grow our economy. That's unfortunately what is coming down. On Monday, the Senate will introduce their budget proposal. The House will follow suit. Unfortunately, even though the Democrats control both bodies, they can't agree between themselves what it is they want to cut or what it is they want to raise in taxes. So it's more likely than not we'll also be looking at a special session. We have some solutions and recommendations on how they can pursue reforming the state spending without tax increases. There's some details on the back table, and we have to answer questions on it as well. But there is another alternative for us. We do not have to follow California and Detroit down the road of economic stagnation. We can reform state spending while growing our economy, and the Policy Center is ready to help the state move in that direction.
Yeah, Jason's outlined ways that we can solve the state budget, and it's back on his table. I should mention that each of those boards back there, for each of our 7 centers. So if you're interested in a particular issue area, you can get information on that center's table back there. One of the other ideas that we've had is to contract out state services. You know, the state does very little contracting out of state services, and just yesterday, based on one of our recommendations to contract out the state printer's office. You know, there's no reason for the state government to have a printer's office in today's day and age. I mean, there's so many Kinko's and other print shops around. There's a bill introduced by a Democrat senator to privatize that service. So that's one example of an idea that comes from a think tank, goes through the political process, and we'll see where it goes in the next few weeks of session. Next, I want to bring up Mike Ennis, who runs our Transportation Center.
Thank you, Dan. A study recently came out that said Seattle has the worst traffic congestion of any city in America. So it's always good to get out of Seattle and come visit folks here in Wenatchee, because Wenatchee wasn't even on the list. But if you think about that for a minute, that's quite remarkable when you compare the size of Seattle to other larger cities like Los Angeles, Miami, Houston. Seattle has them beat, the most congested city in America. At the Transportation Center, we look at everything through the lens of time spending your transportation taxes to certain performance measures, like congestion relief or economic development. Believe it or not, those are not goals in spending your transportation taxes in Washington right now. There are 2 bills in the legislature that would make them goals. One is House Bill 2037, which would make congestion relief a priority, and the other one is Senate Bill 6577, which would make economic development a priority when spending your transportation taxes. The congestion relief bill has essentially not moving forward, while the economic development bill is moving forward. Now, why are these policy goals important? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because they set the tone for how state agencies spend transportation taxes. And I'll give you a quick example of that. A few months ago, we published this piece here called The 5 Principles of a Responsible Transportation Policy, and you can find it on the back table there. In this, we covered what we think are important principles in how transportation taxes should be spent. And we also included some poll information in here where we asked voters statewide how important they thought congestion relief and other performance measures were important to them. And a few months ago, I was asked by an Arkansas state legislator if he could use some of this information on his blog. And he put one of the poll questions on his blog, and it asked this question. As you think about the government's role in transportation, how important to you personally is reducing traffic congestion? And the answers were extremely to fairly important, somewhat important, or not important at all. Now this legislator had this question on his blog, and he had 5 people answer that reducing congestion was not important at all to them. Now as the manager of this blog, he was able to see who was voting on this question. And all 5 votes came from computers owned by the Washington State Department of Transportation. If you can believe that. That's why these policy goals are important, because it sets that tone for how state agencies spend your transportation taxes. A recent study that we just published looks at intercity transit. Now, imagine what intercity transit is for a moment. It's connecting cities over large geographic areas with public transit. You can imagine how expensive that is to do. So this study that we published compares those different modes. Now let's start at the top. In the Puget Sound area, you have modes like commuter rail or light rail. Commuter rail is about $5.40 per passenger mile. Light rail is between $2 and $3 per passenger mile. Buses are a lot better, between 70 cents and $1.50 per mile. Does anybody know what the most efficient intercity transit mode is? Van pools. Van pools, including Link Transit here in Wenatchee, also has a van pool program, and the cost per passenger mile is between 6 and 20 cents. Compare that to commuter rail, which is over $5 per passenger mile. So if you take a look at that study, which we also have in the back, you'll see a lot more information. What's also unique about van pools is that users pay. Users pay between 75 and 80% of the cost, while other intercity transit modes like rail and buses, taxpayers pay about 75 to 80% of the cost. So van pools are the most efficient, and users pay, and you can get more of that information on the back table. And I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have afterwards. Thank you.
Our most recent research center is Center for Education Reform, looking at ways we can improve education, which is really an issue for the entire state. As you heard Lee in the video, we have dismal graduation rates in our state, and it doesn't matter if you're in Seattle or in Eastern Washington. Something needs to be done to reform education. That's what Lee and her center is all about.
Good afternoon. My name is Lee Finna, and I'm the Director for Education at the Washington Policy Center. And since that video was made, the statistic has changed. Washington State is now 43rd in the nation in college graduation rates. So we have a long way to go to improve. These are college graduation rates. So we have a third that are dropping out of high school, and then only a certain portion go to college, and when they go to college, they drop out of college because they're so poorly prepared for college by their high schools. So that's a college graduation rate. Anyway, I have been working on finding out what works to improve student learning in public education, and I'm going to tell you quickly about what we have produced, and then tell you secondly about what is happening in our state legislature right now about education reform. We have written an education reform plan which for Washington State, which is based upon bottom-up reform. We believe that the research shows that putting the principal in charge of his staff, his budget, and his educational program can lead to significant improvements in student learning. And so our reform plan is at the back of the room, and you can find out what we specifically recommend there. It's based on reforms across the nation which show that if you put a principal in charge, you can control the program and focus and get the results that students need. Right now, we also worked with Scott Oakey, who you saw in the video, who has written a book. He is a philanthropist from Microsoft who studied the issue, and he's come up with the same conclusion. You need to put a principal in charge of the schools. 2 weeks ago, we went over to the Tri-Cities area, and he debated a leading union leader at the Badger Basin Club. And before that, we got to go see the Delta High School, which is a new STEM high school, which is science, technology, engineering, and math high school that has been created by private groups in the Tri-Cities areas because the engineers there are so discouraged with the products from the public schools. So they have created a new high school. And what have they done? They found the very best principal. They've allowed that principal to handpick her teachers, to control her budget, and to create the educational program. They have one 9th grade, they're going to add a 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, and they're doing it there in Tri-Cities. We just wrote I have discovered a very good policy out of Minnesota and Colorado called Innovation Schools, which again does the same thing, puts the principal in charge. And we recently had a principal from Manual High from Denver, a principal, Rob Stein, come and speak at our luncheon 2 weeks ago, and he described what he's able to do given those freedoms to create the program for his students, and the results are up. He is accomplishing what needs to be done for schools, and very, very, very exciting development. occurred just last night. We wrote an editorial describing what Principal Stein is offering, and mentioned that if one of the inner city high schools in Seattle were to adopt this program, they can improve student learning. And I was contacted last night by a parent who said, what can we do? And I said, what you can do is bring these ideas to the school superintendent, and that's the way to do this, because it is from the bottom up that we can get reform, and we supposedly have a local control state, and that's the way to improve our schools. So what's happening at the state level, I'll quickly tell you that the big bill before the legislature is the Race to the Top legislation, which is in response to an initiative at the federal level, which recognizes that the federal education officials are all aware that results for students are very poor, mediocre to poor across the nation. And so the Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, has a $4.35 billion pool of money available called the Race to the Top, which is a competitive grants program for states, and it's offering carrots to states that are willing to implement the reforms that Arne Duncan thinks are good for schools. And those include four general areas. One is states that have charter schools or innovation schools or are willing to lift the caps they have on charter schools will get 40 points in this competitive grant. We have a ban, absolute ban on charter schools, as you're aware. And 2 states that are willing to turn around struggling schools, and 3 adopting a teacher and principal evaluation program that will streamline practices to improve the quality of principals and teachers in our state, and 4 is adopting a core curriculum, generalized standards, so that we have one set of standards that students are supposed to learn. And our state has submitted a bill, Senate Bill 6696, which is the answer of the governor to this Race to the Top competition. Our governor sat out the first round of competition, which is very interesting because the other 10 states that sat out the first round also are the weakest states in the nation in education reform. So it's very interesting. So we are now going to submit our application for, it could mean between $150 to $250 million for the state. We will submit that application in June, and we will receive that in September. And the superintendent of public instruction in the state has declared that our legislation that will pass will make us ineligible for those funds because it is such weak legislation. So there is a lot a lot happening in education reform in the state. We're very, we think that these good ideas will eventually take hold, but it's most important that people know what works. And I invite you to go to our website and listen to the video we just posted there of Rob Stein's presentation about what he's able to do at Manual High, an inner city school in Denver. And imagine what you could do at all schools if you put the very best principals in charge, allow them to handpick their teachers on one-year contracts, give them performance pay, select the curriculum that works for students. What could be done would be amazing. So thank you very much.
And education is a great example of how a lot of the ideas that we talk about are nonpartisan or really bipartisan. Because here we are talking about ideas to reform education, and President Obama is echoing the exact same things that are in our reform plan. But our state leaders are behind on doing these implementation ways. But we see it as a great opening of the door by having the president talk about these innovative ways to reform education, and maybe that's a way that our state leaders can take up some of our ideas and reform education and really help kids. That's the main thing that we're talking about here, is how do we improve children's education in our state. Dr. Roger Stark, retired surgeon from Overlake Hospital in the Seattle area, directs our healthcare center and is going to talk to you about what's happening on probably the biggest issue federally, and that's healthcare reform.
Well, thanks very much, Dan. As you're aware, at the Washington Policy Center, we're a state-based think tank, and yet the healthcare issue for this last year has really been at the national level. Now, what you folks may or may not realize is there have been a number of special interest groups that have come out in support of this healthcare reform, and one of those was the American Medical Association. They came out last summer and they were in favor of this major healthcare reform that's going on. Now, subsequently, a number of the specialty organizations came out with their own take on healthcare reform. For example, the dermatologists felt that the entire thing should be scratched. And the obstetricians, they believed that Congress was laboring under a big misconception. And the plastic surgeons, they wanted to put a new face on this. And finally, the proctologists, they believe that when everything is said and done, we're all going to take it in the rear. So they all had their own take on this. What I'd like to do in my couple of minutes is kind of bring you up to speed on what we've been doing this last year and then what we're going to be doing here the next year. Well, as I did seriously mention, this last year the whole thing has been taken up by the national healthcare debate. And we were the recipient last spring of a very substantial grant from our umbrella organization, the State Policy Network, to actually get the free market idea, the patient-centered, patient-directed idea about healthcare out there to the public and to enter that kind of information into the debate. So we ramped up, we increased our publications, our op-eds, our policy notes and policy briefs and so forth. That was number one. The second thing we did is we set up a speakers bureau, and over the last 6 to 8 months, we at the Policy Center have been out over 50 times talking to chambers, Rotary groups, Tea Party organizations, forums, healthcare debates, and things like that, actually throughout the Northwest. The next thing we did was a video, a 3-part video that you can actually see. It's on the back table, or you can go to our website, the Washington Policy Center, and access it there. And that's received some very, very nice compliments and some very nice utilization on YouTube. So those are the kinds of things that we did to get the message out about, again, patient-directed, patient-centered healthcare. And Representative Hastings can speak to this perhaps a little bit more, but it looks like the major healthcare debate is stalled right now in Washington, D.C. In the last 2 weeks, there have been 3 national polls that have come out, and the range is from 53 to 55 to 61% of the American public at this point in time wants Congress to start over on national health care reform. So we would like to think that we played a small part or a small role in that debate, and we feel like we did, at least here in the Pacific Northwest. So that took up most of our time over the last 12 months. There are 2 bills, real briefly, I'd like to talk about that are marching through committee down in Olympia. One we actually testified on and we are supportive of, and this would increase the ability of Washington State residents to purchase health insurance across state borders. Now, the issue here with health insurance on an individual basis is every policy sold in the state of Washington has 57 mandates. And research shows that each one of these mandates adds about 0.5% to 1% to the cost of that health care policy. So you can do the math. If we have 57 in this state, that really jacks up by 20–25% the cost of a health care policy. Unlike, say, Idaho that has 12 or 13 mandates, or Arizona that only has a handful. So if we could access those insurance policies, we could increase the competition, we could decrease price, and we could actually decrease the number of uninsured in our state. So that piece of legislation looks really good to us. The second piece of legislation looks horrible, and this is the Washington State Hospital bed tax. And let me give you just a little bit of background on this. The purpose of this bill is to generate money for Washington State General Fund so we can have more Medicaid dollars coming from Washington, D.C. Now, you might be sitting there thinking this is a fraud or this is a scam, but actually this has been going on for over 30 years. States will game the Medicaid system so they can get more federal dollars. And next week we're going to release a fairly substantial study, a policy brief on this very issue. And you can access that again on our website, or if you sign up on our mailing list, we can get you a copy of this. As I say, it's been going on for 30 years, and this will be one of the most egregious examples in the state of Washington. What will happen is every hospital in the state, every hospital except those that are state and federally owned in the state will have to pay a bed tax. That tax will go into the Medicaid fund. Now, many of you realize Medicaid dollars are matched. Half come from the state, half come from the federal government. So if through this bed tax we have a bigger pile of Medicaid state dollars, then we'll get a bigger pile of federal Medicaid dollars that'll come into our state. And then the hospitals will be compensated more for Medicaid. The problem with it is, first of all, it's gaming the system. Why should people in New Jersey or Texas or California pay for Washington State's Medicaid system? It's bad policy. So that's number one. Number two is, when the state disperses these funds, they go to hospitals that have very high Medicaid utilization. So a hospital, for example, in Wenatchee, or a hospital in Tri-Cities, or in Bellevue, or in Seattle, may not get the same kind of dollars that a county hospital, charity hospital, like Harborview or like the University of Washington receives. So again, this is terrible policy, and we think it's very bad. Thank you very much. We'll be available for questions afterwards.
Our final speaker is Brendan Housekeeper, who runs our Washington Votes website, which you saw in the video, and he's also a policy analyst with our Environmental Center, which is what he's going to talk to you about today. Brendan.
Thanks, Dan. It's a great opportunity to be here in your guys' backyard and have the opportunity to talk about the environment, because it's obvious that you are true stewards of the land and the environment that's been provided to us. And so I just want to talk a minute about a couple ideas of what's going on in Olympia, but first let me start by talking about free market environmentalism. A lot of people wonder what free market environmentalism is. And I think simply put, free market environmentalism means to use technology and innovation to come up with solutions to today's challenges and issues that we face in the environment. Let me give you a couple of examples. Time and time again, industries work through the market and listen to their consumers to understand what it is that they're wanting. The free market brought us one of the greatest technology advancements of recent memory, which is the hybrid car. Government regulation mandated in the state of California and other states mandated that they wanted to pick and choose technologies. They wanted to go after hydrogen cars and electric cars. But the technology that prevailed through the free market was the use of hybrid technology. So that's an example of where the free market was able to come up with a solution of what it is the consumer was asking for, and at the same time provide environmental benefit that assists the environment in our day and time. But too often we see governments trying to pick and choose technologies that we will use to help advance the environment and provide protections. But all that does is restrict the innovation from industry as we move forward. So let me talk about a couple of ideas of what we're looking at in Olympia. For 2010, Todd Myers, our director for the Environmental Center, and myself put together some recommendations to the legislature of things that they could do to help out the environment. I think many of you would agree that when we talk about the environment and we talk about how we're going to deal with the environment, we have to start with talking about the environment by understanding we have a limited amount of resources to help aid our activities in correcting environmental harm or the problems that we face. So the first thing one of the things that we recommended to the legislature is that we need to step back and we need to prioritize. We need to prioritize when it comes to the environment. What are the most important issues out there? Because we can't conquer all of the environmental issues that are out there. We have to start by looking at them similar to the priorities of government budgeting solutions that Governor Locke brought to the state of Washington. We need to use those type of ideas and concepts when it comes to the environment. And we need to understand what the priorities are and how we're going to move forward. So let me give you an example of how we need to prioritize. In the 2009 legislative session, the lawmakers in Olympia chose to pass on adopting policies to create a cap-and-trade system. Shortly after the session ended, Governor Gregoire adopted or announced an executive order that sidestepped the legislature's authority and moved forward with asking her state agencies to implement cap-and-trade policies. She wanted state agencies to get a head start so that when the legislature came back, if they so chose to adopt cap-and-trade policies, the busy work would already be done. So one of the questions that we asked at the time, well, what will this cost? How much money will be spent on this? It took about 8 months to get the answer to that. But the answer was that the Department of Ecology alone had to defer $1.6 million in manpower and other funding from current activities that they were charged with doing, that the legislature adopted and said, we want you to work on these priorities, and instead had to set those things aside and work on the governor's executive order to adopt policies for cap and trade. Let me just read to you some of the things that the Department of Ecology had to set aside. This is the consequences of the things that they had to set aside. Communities would continue to be exposed to air pollution, newer expanded businesses face stricter pollution control requirements, and the state might suffer federal sanctions. Slower response to business and industries that need air quality and water permits to start and expand operations. And they won't be able to identify, assess, and respond to toxic hotspots. Won't be able to develop response to and reduce risk from toxics like benzene, chromine, and formaldehyde. So as the legislature is moving forward and chose not to adopt these policies and tried to prioritize, the governor directed her state agencies to pull that $1.6 million off the table and focus on cap and trade policies instead. So what we've asked for the legislature, a policy suggestion that we've made to the legislature, is that they start by prioritizing and funding those things that are most important to the environment. And it comes down to this. The environmental community looked at the last session, and their assessment of the last session was that they failed the environment because they came up with a list of approximately $1.6 million in action items that they believe we could have done that would have helped the environment, such as improving water quality, protecting air quality. But instead we chose to pursue cap and trade policies. So our point of prioritization is that we start by saying, instead of looking at how much money we're spending on these things, we have to look at what the benefit is that we're getting from these activities. Instead of adopting policies and laying the groundwork for policies that may never come to fruition, we should be working on real actionable items like improving water quality. One last thought that I'll leave with you is we worked on a cost of construction around the state of Washington. This gives an example of prioritization. We often hear from our policymakers, both at the local and state level, that we want things like affordable housing. And yet when we look at the rules and regulations that are put in place by our local policymakers and our state policymakers, often these rules and regulations are the impediment to having affordable housing in our communities. We did a policy brief on this. It's available online. I'm going to be happy to take any questions.
Well, I hope that gave you a good flavor of the kind of issues that we work on and the issues that we can work on now that we're in Eastern Washington through these different centers. And I hope that you'll join with us. Everyone has a folder that was on your seat when you came today. There's information about how to join the organization and how to get involved in our efforts here in Eastern Washington. And I hope that you'll join today while you're at lunch. Our minimum level of support is only $50 for a year, and you can receive our publications, be invited to events like this in the Wenatchee area and across Eastern Washington. And we'll also send you a copy of our book with Scott Oakey. You've heard that mentioned a couple times today. It's a great read and an easy read on waste reform education. And if you join today, we'll make sure you get a copy of Scott Oakey's book. Chris is excited to work with all of you here in Eastern Washington. And we're excited to be over here. And we hope this is just the first of many events here in Wenatchee and that you'll join with us. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization, so all of our contributions that help cover expenses that we have here in Eastern Washington are all come from individuals and businesses like you. So we hope that you'll join with us and be part of what we're doing here in Eastern Washington. We're really excited, and like I said, I hope this is just the first of many events that you'll come to here in Wenatchee and that you'll be part of our organization and contact Chris about issues that we need to know about in the Wenatchee area that we can research and work on going forward. Thanks very much for being with us today.